It's a really difficult discipline for us to live one day at a time, or even one moment at a time. To really not be invested in perhaps thinking about what our menu is going to be tomorrow, or what our menu might be for breakfast this morning. And just to be invested in sitting here for the moment, sitting here for this second, for this time, and to be deeply invested in just this moment today. Wouldn't it be incredible if we could really live that one day at a time? I've sat with many folks who are in recovery, and we've agreed sometimes it's not one day at a time, but it's really 1 second at a time. It's one moment at a time, in order to be fully engaged in our own recovery, to be fully engaged in the process of life. Because if we don't stay in the moment, we could miss out on some wonderful opportunities, some wonderful seconds that might just pass us by if we don't live in this second, in this moment. I know that sometimes my mind can get so distracted from what's going on in the moment that sometimes people will say to me, "Did you just see what happened?" And I'm like, I don't think I did see what just happened, because I'm so invested over here somewhere that we've forgotten to stay in the moment. And I know people who have had great blessings because they've been able to stay in the moment, to see what's going on around them, and to be very much aware of God's presence in that moment, in that life. One day at a time, sweet Jesus. I think that's what Jesus teaches us, is to live in this moment, to live one day at a time, to live 1 second at a time, to live so that we don't miss out on the blessings of life, and to live in those moments, because when you start to receive those blessings, when you start to see those blessings, I believe that we start to see worth in our own lives and in our own bodies. We begin to see the worth not only of creation, but we get to see our own worthiness. We get to see our own fulfillment of who it is that God has created us to be. I think sometimes when we're living outside of the moment, when we're not seeing the blessings, it's easy for us to be on a downward cycle, believing that nothing is good, believing that we are not good. And if we begin to believe those things, then we begin to act out of those things, act out in ways that often bring destruction to our lives. Act out in ways, we see other people getting blessings, and we wonder why we're not getting them. And sometimes I think we're not getting the blessings, we are getting them, but we just don't observe them. We don't see them happening in our lives because we're either so distracted, or we've moved ourselves out of this one day at a time place of our own lives. It's a discipline. It's not easy. It's a discipline to be able to stop and stay still for a second. It's a discipline for us to really acknowledge that God is at work in our lives. And it's a discipline that I think that we need to hone in our own bodies so that we can truly be open to what it is that Spirit is doing. You know, I was thinking this morning as I arrived, and for some reason I just had forgotten that Sebastian was on vacation for a week, and I arrived this morning, and I couldn't understand why the building wasn't already open, and I couldn't understand why the soundboard wasn't already up and running, and it didn't take me long to remember that he was on vacation, otherwise I might have got angry, and that wouldn't have been a good thing for me this morning. But it took me then just a few minutes just to clear my own mind and think about what needed to be done in the moment to enable this worship space to be ready for us this morning. And after a few minutes of just running around like a headless chicken, I just had to decide to stop and say, to whose glory is all this? Is this really about me controlling worship and making sure that everything's in the right place, or is it me just about acknowledging the blessing of being able to run around? What a blessing that I'm able just to be alive and to breathe in this place. What a blessing that I was here for a few minutes on my own with absolutely nobody else in the building. I was just able to breathe in that blessing. What a way to see life from a place of blessing rather than from a place of anguish and from a place of anxiety. In those moments I get to observe the God of my own understanding. The God who can turn my life upside down instead of seeing the annoyance of seeing the blessing of being able just to sit in this room for a moment. I don't know how many of you had that opportunity just to sit in this room just for a moment and to observe the hundreds of years of prayer that have been in this building and that we get to participate in and to share in. One day at a time, seeing our lives from a place of blessing rather than from a place of anxiety. Seeing our lives from a place of worthiness rather than from a place of destruction. And I truly believe that if we begin to put that into our hearts and into our bodies, then we begin to see the blessings that come from living in the presence of God. Then we get to see how we can make decisions about our lives. Then we get to see how we can make a difference, not only in our own lives, but a difference in the world. Then we can get to see. Now I put that into the whole context of some of the destruction that's happening in our world. And I put that into the context of how can we then use this experience of God, this one day at a time, this one moment at a time. How can we use that to create change? How can we use that? And I think that we can use that by putting out into the world our positive energy, our goodness, our acknowledgement of who God is. Because even though we will get this afterlife that will be full of blessing and joy and no more suffering, no more pain, no more shootouts in Tel Aviv, no more hunger, no more poverty, whilst we might begin to think that we can live in that place, I truly believe that we have been called to create that place here on earth and begin to use our lives to create that good energy, that goodliness, that holiness. And those of us who have been on this journey for a while are beginning to see the fruits of that good energy that we've been putting into the world. Because I truly believe that the world is turning around, that things are changing, things are moving. And it may not be going at the speed I want to because I'm invested in the outcome. But I truly believe that they are changing. Things are moving. You and I are beginning to feel good about ourselves. You and I are beginning to make good decisions that will not only affect our own lives, but will affect this world. And other churches and other communities of faith are also engaged in this process of looking at the blessings of life and the blessings that we can receive from one another just because of who we are. Today, as we begin this series of one day at a time, next week we'll begin unpacking the prayer of Jesus. But as we begin to think about how we can bring this serenity prayer into our hearts and into our lives, I wonder if we could just take home with us that reading today of thinking about if we could start our day with that serenity prayer, even if it's just the first 4 lines of it. That God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The serenity to the wisdom to know the difference. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could accept that into our hearts and our lives? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we weren't trying to control people, places, and things, but rather only trying to control who we are? Trying to see that there is something in our own lives that we could change that might then have an impact on people, places, and things.